Well, LSU fans, we're finally back. It's game week. LSU, Ole Miss. And as media talked to players last night, the common theme was that it doesn't get any more classic than this. This idea of LSU against the little brother of the SEC. And that's one thing, Glenn, I have learned over the past couple of weeks and just days talking to people about this game in and around Baton Rouge. You don't lose to Ole Miss. You don't want to lose to Ole Miss. And this is going to be a fun one on Saturday night. It looks like football weather, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We welcome you into the Go 24/7 podcast. He is Glen West. My name is Bryce Koon. Glenn, first off, we're going to get into the football talk. How pumped are you? Fingers crossed that this forecast looks the way it does on Saturday night, because that is peak optimal football weather inside Tiger Stadium.
I think the fans deserve it after what they experienced a couple weeks ago. We need a good kind of great atmosphere, great weather conditions, great everything about kind of the prenup to this game or the tune up to this game, and so I'm really excited to see kind of just all the people that are out there, the environment, the atmosphere. This is going to be a game where LSU really leans into celebrating the 100 years of Tiger Stadium. They're going to have some probably very interesting, kind of cool videos and players that are going to be coming in for this. There's going to be a lot of excitement around this game, and we'll see kind of what the team is able to produce on the field. But I think just from a vibe standpoint, this should be a really, really fun atmosphere for all the fans that are in attendance. And I've already got a bunch of buddies that are driving up from New Orleans next week, so we're having an open house, I guess, next weekend here. But this is going to be a good one. I think they're choosing the right week to come up for this game.
Yeah, we were just talking with one of my wife's friends, and we're going over their house on Friday evening to have dinner and everything. And they said, "Hey, we got a bunch of people that Baton Rouge is going to be buzzing this upcoming weekend." It's about time, Glenn, because I will say this, and I am not one. I'm not going to down the LSU atmosphere that a lot of people maybe have done kind of outside the media, but this is an opportunity for me to really experience Death Valley and Tiger Stadium. I think to the full extent. Maybe one of two, maybe three. We'll see opportunities this season to see it as well. But LSU takes on Ole Miss. Obviously, the big news: LSU coming off of a bye week. Ole Miss coming off of what I think a lot of people, Glenn, and we'll start here. We're kind of excited if you're an LSU fan, because you're like, okay, you got to go to Columbia. LSU knew, and LSU fans know how physical of a football game that was, a month ago. But Ole Miss kind of took care of business, and that's what good teams do. They flex their muscles. Coming into this matchup, how much does the bye week really help LSU in terms of the rest factor? I kind of think it does. Is it overplayed in your mind, or is this something that really can help LSU? Obviously, Ole Miss traveling all the way to South Carolina and then back to back road trips down to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I think it can help. I mean, I don't know that that's going to be like the major factor as to why LSU wins or loses this game. I think when you get an extra week to prep for a team, I think maybe that's probably the most important part of having the bye week right before Ole Miss. I mean, I remember, we used to talk with players before the Alabama game, because that was always the open date for LSU, and they really liked having that extra week to prepare for Alabama. And I think it's the same deal here with Ole Miss. I think LSU really comes into this game knowing a lot about this team, about this Ole Miss team, and kind of where maybe they can have some success, maybe where they hope to cover up some weaknesses. I think probably that angle is a little bit more important in my eyes. I do think that they were able to recover. I think Brian Kelly said they gave him off on Friday and Saturday of last week, and Greg Penn was able to watch a full day of football on Saturday, and he was telling us yesterday that this is an SEC that's wide open, and we've been saying it for a long time, at least kind of the first couple weeks here of the SEC schedule, and all the parity that's happened, all the upsets, all of the close games and close calls for some of the teams that are competing at the top of the conference. And I don't think you can go into any week assuming anything with this conference and kind of the way that it's been slated so far. So the players are seeing that, and I think that's an extra just an added boost to whatever extra motivation they already have going into this game, because I do think this is a game and a matchup for LSU that is particularly on the defensive side of the ball. You're going to see a lot of these players wanting to get up for this game because of what happened to them last year.
Yeah, and obviously I'll have a piece out tomorrow morning on this, but a lot of players talked about the revenge factor, but being able to keep their emotions in check. And make sure you check that out, because Savion Jones had something pretty funny to say about how different guys in their pregame routines. And once you read it, it'll make sense, and you'll be able to know who we're talking about. But Glenn, you did point out a big point here that I wanted to talk about this game. You know, I don't necessarily think, and people can clip this and make me look like a fool after the fact. I don't know if this is going to be a high scoring game. Like, I really kind of see this being a game where, yes, there are two good offenses, and there are some defenses that have weaknesses, and, and so forth and so forth. But I don't see a 55-45 game like we saw last year in Oxford. I think it's going to be a hard fought. The defenses are going can make some big plays at times. We're going to see two great quarterbacks. I know Nuss tried to downplay, the quarterback battle. Yes, there are 10 other guys on the field, but talk a little bit about the battle between Nuss and obviously Jackson Dart, two of the SEC's best quarterbacks. You have to believe. Do you think that's you think it's a factor in terms of why this game could just be uber competitive and we could see a 31-27 final or a 27-24 final? I mean, do you echo that sentiment that, the quarterbacks could play a big role, but this still could be low scoring?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that probably the one big thing that am going into this game wanting to see is just can this defense get off the field on third down? I mean,
Yeah.
last year they just were not able to do that in that game. They were not only was it the explosive plays and all that stuff, but they just could not get off the field to save their life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this team has proven, or this defense has proven, that it can do that, and not just against the UCLA's of the world or the Nichols of the world. I mean, they had some busted plays in there and against both of those teams, but they also were able to get off the field pretty consistently for longer stretches of the game. I think that that's going to be really, really big here in this game. And so, how do you go about doing that? On defense, you got to get some pressure on Jackson Dart. And I think when Dart has been a little bit flummoxed at times, I mean that I think that's the way that you get after a quarterback like that who has been playing really, really good football and obviously leading a number one offense in the country into this game. But I don't know that they've played anybody like LSU to this point either. I mean, they
Yeah.
played South Carolina. That was a tough, obviously a tough team for them. Kentucky obviously was a team that I should say South Carolina. They had their way with South Carolina, but the Kentucky team certainly, especially on defense, it was very physical with them and did a really nice job of being able to get them off the field and put them in some longer downs and yardage in that game. So I think that LSU's defense has got to be able to start up front, very physical, get into the backfield, make some plays back there, because I do think this front seven is going to be kind of where LSU has to win this game. And the play that those guys make, the plays that those guys can make, Savion Jones, Braden Swinson, Deshaun Womack, certainly Greg Penn and Whit Weeks, and those guys in the middle of the field at linebacker. But I do think that this is going to be a really interesting kind of back and forth with the quarterbacks, because I do think that they are, like you mentioned, two of the better ones that we've seen so far in terms of consistency and moving their offenses down the field, and just how much the teams lean on those quarterbacks kind of going into this thing. I mean, Ole Miss is number 2 in the country right now, I think, in passing yards per game. I think Garrett Nussmeier is right up there with completions and passing yards as well for a quarterback. So these teams go as far as their passing games have taken them so far, and we'll get into it here in a little bit. But I do think one of the underrated, or not underrated, but one of the big storylines leading up to kickoff is going to be what's going on with Trey Harris at Ole Miss in terms of his availability for that game. So if he's not playing, I think Ole Miss has to really, you draw up plays for guys like that, and you kind
Yeah.
of build a good part of your offensive game plan around a player like Trey Harris. And even if he does play, is he going to be close to 100%? I mean, we've obviously heard seen reports that it's not a very pretty injury for his ankle right now. So like they've got to really figure out just kind of what they're going to do if he does not suit up for this game. So you take away his Dart's top weapon. How does he react to that? Who's he going to rely on? Those kinds of things are going to be really interesting to kind of follow here, especially with LSU kind of coming in here with fresh legs and a lot to prove to itself and to the fan base that they can have a much better effort than they showed last year.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, look, Ole Miss still has weapons. Juice Wells, I mean, Priest Corn, the tight end. They've still got guys. but you're talking about a guy that will probably be in the Bolitnikov conversation late into the year in Trey Harris. I mean, that is a guy that is going to be not just one of the best in the SEC, but you could look around and say, hey, that guy's one of the best in the country. So to your point, it does change a lot of things, Glenn. It takes me exactly where I want to go. The defensive line and offensive line battle is going to be one that national media, we are going to talk about. Everyone's going to talk about because it's this vaunted Ole Miss defensive front against the LSU offensive line. Ole Miss, averages 4 sacks a game. LSU doesn't really give up a lot of quarterback pressures. That's great. Glenn, I really want to focus on because whether or not Trey Harris is a go or not, I still have concerns about the back end of the defense in terms of LSU. This is a statement game. Like I was listening to some radio in Baton Rouge today, and I'll say to Jacob Hester brought this. It was a great point. He said this is the type of game where Ashton Stamp solidifies himself as a guy or just one of the guys. Like regardless if Trey Harris is in the game or not, Stamps is probably going to draw the assignment of him. They're going to try to match him up with Stamps, assuming Harris is healthy, to try to get away from Zy Alexander, who does have more experience. We'll see what the extent of Alexander's health is, too. Gotta love these injury reports between two coaches we know are playing at Coy. But
Yeah.
wanted to get your thoughts on the back end of this defense. Brian Kelly talked a little bit about it on Monday. They are settling in. Wasn't very, I would say, specific in terms of the
Forthcoming.
actual guys. Yeah, forthcoming, and that's okay. It is what it is. But regardless of who's back there, what's your confidence level in this secondary? Now, you could say the defensive line, the pass rush has to make an impact to be able to affect it. But at some point, these guys are going to have to make plays one-on-one end zone coverage, something they ultimately struggled with last year. I feel like they're better, but this is a totally different test than anything they faced maybe since USC.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it there, right there. I mean, the USC game, I think, is the one where you could point to and say, like, okay, can this team put up a little bit of a better effort? I mean, Miller Moss, was really having his way with that defense and defensive backs there in that game, especially towards the end in the second half when they were just carving them up. Um, we've seen in the big games this secondary has really had trouble figuring out these quarterbacks, and Laura Sellers in the first half really killed them in the South Carolina game. I think most people who watched that game would say if Lenora Sellers had played that entire game, does LSU even have a chance to come back and win because of how well he was playing? Moss, of course, was extremely efficient in that game again for USC in the first game of the year in Las Vegas. And I think probably the biggest thing that I've noticed here with the secondary is they're around the play, but they're just not always making the play. And
Yeah.
they can get their hands in there, but can they have somebody knock a ball loose? Can they contest the ball well enough to where the receiver can't go up and make a contested catch and make it and bring it in for a longer gain? Can they not miss tackles? I mean, like the missed tackles thing was a huge emphasis last year for this secondary, and they couldn't wrap up. They couldn't get the guys to the ground. So I think that LSU, from this perspective, is really going to be have to be fundamentally sound, whether Trey Harris plays or not. And it's kind of a believe it when you see it kind of deal for the
Yeah.
secondary because they've done a decent job against defenses that are against offenses that have don't have a great track record of being very good this year. UCLA, I mean, the South Alabama game, I think, was just statistically that was a good offense, but they were not at the same level of athlete that LSU had on the field. I think
Mhm.
you could just see that. So this is going to be a huge test for this secondary and for this defense. And I'll continue to say it, but I do think that the amount of pressure that this front seven can get on this quarterback, on Jackson Dart, could very much dictate just kind of the success that they can have in the back end. And can they force him into some throws a little quicker than maybe he wants to get that ball off? I mean, this is a fast offense, and I
Yeah.
think like the tempo here is also going to be something we have to bring up. Because they're going to move quick. If they get an incompletion, they're going to be lining up 10 seconds later to get the next playoff. So like they they're going to come in and they're going to play fast. I think they're going to try to challenge the secondary early. And that means the communication between the linebackers and the safeties is going to have to be really pristine. The cornerbacks are going to have to really be listening and kind of, because it's going to be loud in there. I mean, especially on defense, it's going to be loud when that Ole Miss offense is on the field. So they've got to be communicating well. They've got to tackle well. And they've got to make a couple plays throughout this game. I don't know if it's an
Yeah.
interception. I don't know if it's a third down, fourth down, because we know how much Lane Kiffin likes to be aggressive on those third and fourth down situations. I don't know if it's a turnover on downs kind of deal. They need to have some kind of momentum swing on defense to really show, I think, early on in this game that they're here to play, and they're here to not get beat up for 4 quarters. So those are some of the things I'm looking at in terms of just what I'd like to see out of this secondary. And if LSU can be a little bit better in that aspect, if they can be a little tighter in coverage, I like their chances of getting off the field a couple times in this game to really help the offense kind of hold up their end of the deal.
Yeah, I've started to call them sticky note stats. It's, you put a sticky note on your mirror, you want to remember something, you can put this stat up there and say, okay, if this falls through or this carries, if this stat stays true, then LSU might win or lose the game. And those are the kind of stats that define it. One of them I'm going to go ahead and put out there is the average down and distance on third down. I mean, Glenn, when you talked about getting off the field on third downs, you gave me flashbacks to the 3rd and 11s, 3rd and 12s in Oxford last year that Ole Miss was dicing this defense up apart. 365 days, however you want to call it, later, I do think this defense has improved. My biggest question is how much. And this is the ultimate test because, like we have been talking about, ever since USC, everyone, fans, media, the staff has known you should be able to navigate, and that's with respect to the opponents you had in between. You should be able to navigate that portion of your schedule. But your next big litmus test would be indeed this game against Ole Miss. And wanted to take it a step further here with you, Glenn. Heard a lot of people talk about this must-win game, must-win game. I listened to you yesterday on the radio talk about this is a massive game. I don't know if it's necessarily a game where if you lose this, the playoff picture is completely done. The SEC's been crazy, college football's been crazy, but in fact, if you win it, you position yourself not just for the SEC but for a playoff berth if you can take care of business the rest of the way. How much of a must-win game is it for you in this season, but also just a litmus test and maybe a benchmark of where this program is under Brian Kelly in their development?
Yeah, I think it's huge in terms of the ladder that you mentioned there. I mean, look, I think if you want to prove that you're for real this season, you have to win this game.
Mhm.
Um, but if you lose, to me, it's how you lose it. Like, I think that if LSU goes out there and gets blown out by 20, 30 points, then you can tell that this is a program that still has a lot of stuff to figure out. And that you need that 2025 class in here as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing for me here is that we've seen LSU be competitive. We've seen LSU win some big games. I mean, the Alabama game 2 years ago was huge for the kind of the tone setter of the program. But since then, they have not been in a position where you kind of think like, okay, they kind of control their own destiny. Like that. I
Yeah.
think that this is a kind of a benchmark game for me in terms of, has this program taken the steps to win a big game and then kind of build on it and continue
Mhm.
to kind of push forward. Because I think I believe at the Alabama game 2 years ago, that was still a two-loss team that they had going into that game. That was a 6-2 team. They did not have a whole
Yeah.
ton of kind of postseason aspirations at that point. I mean, they were just trying to upset an Alabama team that was pretty good and kind of get a good notch on their belt. This team has all their goals still in front of them here. Like
Yeah.
they win this game. They like you said, they have set the table for themselves to be right at the top of the conference or competing among the top of the conference for SEC championship appearance, for a playoff appearance, all that stuff, if they can win this game. So I think it's huge to prove to themselves and to prove to the fan base that they can win these kinds of games. But to me, it's the next step after that. It's like, okay, you win this game this weekend, then you got to go to Arkansas, then you got to go to Texas A&M, who just walloped Missouri. Arkansas just beat
Yeah.
beat Tennessee. Like there's it doesn't let up after this. And that was something that Garrett Nussmeier told us.
Yeah.
This is not a one of one kind of game for us. Like, this is not the biggest game that we're going to play in this year, because we think all the games that we're going to be playing from here on out is the biggest game of the season. And I think there's some truth to that, especially with the way that the conference has shown to be so far. So, look, this is a huge, huge game, I think, just in terms of, vibes and culture setting, and kind of looking at kind of this program going forward, uh, proving that you can win this game. But to me, it's what happens after that, and kind of how LSU kind of approaches winning a big game like this and not laying a dud the next week. When you beat Alabama a couple of years ago, you had everything in front of you. You had the opportunity to potentially be a playoff team if you kind of ran the tables there. Then you go to Texas A&M and you lose to Texas A&M, and all of a sudden you're a 3-loss team. Yes, you're still in the college, you're still in the SEC championship game against Georgia, but you're really not. I mean, that's their biggest game of the year. You're not
Yeah.
playing for a playoff spot at that point. You're not playing for a New Year's Six bowl at that point. You're playing just to be a 3-loss team. And I think you go in here and you get a win. You're 5-1. You've got everything kind of out in front of you here. This would be a huge, huge benchmark for me in terms of, okay, winning the big game, but then following it up with more big wins after that, because I do think that this is a team that can win these big games. They've shown it in the past. They've haven't played near to their potential, I don't think, this year. I think we're still kind of on the precipice of trying to find out what this team exactly is. And I think I think hopefully this bye week, this extra week of preparation can get us there. But this is going to be a huge, huge test, no doubt. And I'm curious what your thoughts on that are, actually, just kind of where this thing is in terms of the grand scheme of the program, or just the team or just this team as a whole. Just what do you think about just kind of what this game kind of symbolizes going into it?
Yeah, I've been pretty vocal on our board about I think this might be the most important game to date for Brian Kelly. Obviously the Alabama game in 2022. I mean, look, everyone's excited about that, but going into the game, and I wasn't on the beat, but I did obviously pay attention to college football and and talked about it. Glenn, you could correct me wrong. I don't think it was necessarily the expectation, that you had to go win that football game. It was more of like, let's look competitive. This is still
Yeah,
year one, and there's a lot of changing and moving parts that we've got to figure out. Then last year, the Ole Miss game was disappointing for sure, but I think everyone understood by that point is that the defense that LSU employed was one of the worst in the nation statistically. So it was like the expectation. Now there's still some questions, but it's year three. This 2025 class, like you mentioned, in recruiting, they're coming next year, but it's what can you do this year for me? And Glenn, I don't ever want to move the goalpost back on expectations, but I do think that this has become even more important because we've seen what happened in college football the past 2 weeks, especially last Saturday. Anybody can beat anybody. And I feel like that the door has maybe opened where for a lot of people, they might have felt LSU was a tier two, maybe even a borderline tier three team in the SEC, depending on how you looked at it this year. Well, now everyone kind of looks mortal. Now we'll see what Texas looks like on Saturday, but outside of Texas, Texas A&M, and LSU, everyone else has a loss in the SEC play. So I really do believe it's important in that magnitude because, like you mentioned, can you capture the moment? Can you go out there and win a big football game, enjoy it, have fun, enjoy the moment when Tiger Stadium is going to be rocking, but then turn around next week and go play an Arkansas team, that's going to be a tough football game.
yeah,
Going over there. So being able to back it up. So I think that's what we're going to learn more about this team. And you can also learn a lot about a loss. If they lose this game, is it a pack it in mentality, or do they understand to say this conference is crazy, and crazy things have happened. Let's see. Let's just keep playing and see what happens. So this is important to me. I don't think it's a make or break. Brian Kelly getting, he's not
yeah.
the right guy for the
None,
job.
none of that. None of that. No.
None of that. But I do think it's important just to see how far this program has come in 2.5, almost 3 years with him at the helm. So I'm excited. I think it's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
Um,
What would you say? Because I think maybe this would be a good kind of way to um, maybe close it out, or before we get
yeah,
to predictions here, just like a key to the game that maybe we haven't talked about yet. I mean, I think tempo is going to be important. Stop slowing down the tempo of Ole Miss is going to be important on defense. I think you look at kind of the trenches there, the trenches battle, whether it's LSU's D-line getting pressure on Jackson Dart, or Ole Miss's D-line getting pressure on or LSU's offensive line being able to hold up against a really stout front for Ole Miss. Is there something we haven't touched on yet that you're looking at in terms of just a key to the game that you think is going to be really important? Because I have one, and I'm just curious if you might have one too.
Hopefully, I'm not taking yours. I think you took mine 2 weeks ago, Glenn. So I'll go
Yeah.
back at you for this one. But no, I do. And Brian Kelly's talked a lot about complementary football on both sides of the football. But for me, I think this hinges a lot just offensively. We saw, and a lot of people got excited about the emergence of Caden Durham over the past, previous 2 games, especially in that South Carolina game, UCLA, but then obviously South Alabama again. I think where LSU could get into trouble is if the run game's not there, it's going to allow what is a very good defensive line to pin their ears back and focus on getting Garrett Nussmeier. You can't be one dimensional. And even so, and we've talked about this last year, you were one dimensional, but you really weren't because Jaden Daniels could run the football better than any running back you could have hoped to have on the roster. So, this year it's different. I think we asked Nuss yesterday. He goes, it's still something I'm working on. I'm not too confident
Yeah.
in my ability yet of that kind of thing. But I think if they can balance, Glenn, it doesn't have to be explosive. Like, it doesn't have to be the first play going 79 yards down the field. Everyone would love that, but it doesn't have to be that. But if Ole Miss has to respect what Caden Durham, Josh Williams, and Caleb Jackson can do, I think it really opens up for Garrett Nussmeier to showcase his full arsenal in the passing game. I think that's the strength. I think Ole Miss knows that's the strength. Their hope is if we can make them one dimensional to where we know and they know they are passing the football, that's going to allow and I'll say this, a perceived weakness. And talking with our Ole Miss side, that's the perceived weakness of the Ole Miss team, the secondary. That helps them out tremendously.
Yeah.
So I think it's balance offensively. Like, if you can run the football, and it doesn't have to be explosive, but respectfully, you can pick up 3-4 yards per carry, break off the occasional 5-6-7 yard carry. That's going to help out Garrett Nussmeier to where I think he can be comfortable. It alleviates pressure off of your offensive line, and it keeps a defense that I think is probably better on paper than people in terms of who they've actually played, but they're still very good. It keeps them honest, and I think that's a key to winning this football game.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm sticking on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm looking at the short yardage passing game. Like I
Mm.
think that getting the ball out quick, it's
Xavier
looking like
Thomas, please.
yes, get Xavier Thomas involved. I mean, I think for me, like it's not looking like a couple of these receivers are going to play. CJ
Yeah.
Daniels, it's not trending good for him right now. Kyle Parker, Chris Hilton, these are guys that have had injuries before this season and just haven't seen the field very much or at all in Hilton's case. But I think here that core four, and what I mean by core four, Kyron Lacey, Aaron Anderson, Mason Taylor, and Xavier Thomas from a pass catcher perspective, those guys are going to be heavily targeted in this game. I think all four of them you could see getting 5+ targets in this game. And it's going to be really important, in my opinion, that LSU goes in there and continues to lean into what their strength has been. And what their strength, to me, at least so far, has been getting the ball out quick, letting those guys go make plays, get first downs, keep moving the chains, extend drives, eat up clock, control time of possession. What we saw last or 2 weeks ago in that Kentucky game was Kentucky wasn't explosive offensively. They didn't do a ton
Yeah.
to kind of move the needle offensively. But what did they do? They chewed up clock. They had
Yep.
nearly double the amount of game time. I think it was 39 minutes to 20 minutes or something like that. 39 something to 20 something was the game time discrepancy there. And I think it's got to be a huge emphasis for this offense to have longer extended drives to not only just keep Ole Miss's offense off the field, but to keep that defense, LSU's defense, pretty fresh too.
Mhm.
When they do have to go up tempo against that Ole Miss offense, that they're fresh and their legs are good and they're able to make some plays to maybe where they can get off the field a little bit quicker, as opposed to Ole Miss just churning up downfield for 30, 40, 50, 60 yard drives every time. So like there's the offense, to me, I think it just their identity has been in the passing game. I'm like you. I'd like to see this running game get a little bit of something for them, like just to help them out a little bit. I don't go in really expecting that, though. I mean, we saw it at times in the South Carolina game with Durham and what he can do running wise, but we didn't see it against USC. We didn't see it much against Nichols. We saw it a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago against South Alabama with some of the big explosive runs, but can they continue to build on that? Is that a trend in the right direction, or is it just an aberration kind of game? And I think
Yeah.
this is going to be a great, like you mentioned, litmus test in that respect from a run game perspective. So I just think there's so much that we can learn about this team following this game, and I'm going to be curious to see kind of what kind of game they settle into. Is it going to be a game where they try for a bunch of explosive plays down the field, or take a few more shots than maybe we're expecting? But I just really think the bread and butter right now, this offense, is just getting it to those playmakers and allowing those guys to continue to move the chains and kind of stay ahead of first downs and kind of keep out of the third and longs, the second and longs kind of situations there. I think that's where this offense has had the most success, and I think that's where they'll continue to have success.
It's gonna be a fun one, and it's time. Let's unveil the curtain. No Lee Corso action. We're not throwing on the mascot hat. Glenn, I'll let you go first. Where are you sitting with this one? How do you feel when the dust settles? Who's going to be emerging victorious?
I have so much faith right now that this offense is going to be able to get it done, and I know that that's maybe a little bit of homerism on my part, but I've seen it now. I'm so close to saying that this offense is on the brink of hitting another gear. And I think we started to see it against South Alabama. And if they can kind of elevate that and show that in this game against an Ole Miss front seven that's been very heralded against a defense that has done a really nice job of slowing teams down when they get in the red zone. I think that's another thing that we didn't mention here in this pod that I think
Yeah.
is probably good to pick up here. Ole Miss's red zone defense is elite. I mean, they are like number 2 in the country right now in red zone defense too. So, and what do we know about LSU in the big game so far? They haven't always capitalized in the red zone. I think it's going to be extremely, extremely important to go get 7 anytime you get inside the 20 in this game. But I do think that LSU is able to do that. I really like the way that Garrett Nussmeier is playing. I love the way that he's getting Mason Taylor and Aaron Anderson and Kyron Lacey, all these guys involved. I've loved what we've seen from them getting the ball to the running backs out of a passing game perspective. Caden Durham, Caleb Jackson, all these guys are catching passes out of the backfield and turning up for positive gains. I think this comes down to a fourth quarter game. I think I like the home team to win a fourth quarter game, and I got LSU 35-31. I think this is going to be a really fun atmosphere. It's going to be a great game. It's going to be a great opportunity here for LSU to prove to themselves and the fan base that they can not only win big games, but can they sustain it here going forward? And I love LSU's mindset coming into this game, and I think that they get it done 35-31.
I love everything you said, and I echo the ability to move the ball. I think LSU is going to be able to do that. Um, Glenn, I'm just I'm just struggling because I still have I close my eyes and I just still have images of Lane Kiffin being able to draw up plays against this secondary. And I think this secondary has grown up a lot. And I truly believe that. I also believe that LSU's pass rush is pretty underrated in terms of, the national perspective. A lot of people talking about Ole Miss. But when you look at the sack numbers, Swenson's right there along with some of their best, and so is Savion Jones. I mean, they have a lot of similarities. Ole Miss also, Glenn, I don't know the actual statistic. They don't play well in Tiger Stadium. That is something historically they have not done. So you have that. You have this underrated feeling. You have that you're an underdog in your own stadium. Glenn, I want to pick LSU. I want to sit here and say that LSU, and I believe they're close to popping off.
Do it. Do it.
I'm taking Ole Miss 31-27. I think Ole Miss wins. I think, Nuss and this offense mount a late drive that ultimately falls short. I think it's going to be a good football game. It's a loaded slate for Saturday. I will tell you this. I will be so happy if LSU wins this football game because I want them to. And Glenn, honestly, for coverage purposes, I really want them to win this game because you've said this. LSU needs a big win for the media. We can be selfish sometimes. We need a big win for the media. I'd love to see it. I'm
We need the
taking Ole
board
Miss.
hopping. We need threads posted for days about how great of a game Joe Sloan called and how
Yes.
much this defense is showing some backbone here going into the very frugal part of their schedule. So yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah, I'm taking Ole Miss 31-27.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
I guess I'll be the sane one of the two of us.
Well, I'll see what my daughter chooses on Friday afternoon. That's the
Yeah,
ultimate pick that
that's
you'll have
true.
to tune into. So, hey, go 24/7 preview podcast LSU Ole Miss. It's going to be electric, and make sure for all the news and notes you head over to go 24/7. Great conversation happening. A massive recruiting weekend too.
Yeah,
So
we
make
didn't
sure
even
you
get
check
into
out
that.
our national team is going to be has already been covering who's going to be there. Multiple top quarterback prospects. Elijah Haven is another guy that was reported that he's going to be there, and he's
Anquan
a dude.
Fagans, his
He's a dude.
safety
Yep,
commit from
committed to
Auburn.
Auburn. Trey Taylor is going to be
Yeah,
in the building, another 2027 quarterback. Then obviously, those guys are from UHI are going to make the trip over. Lamar Brown going to be in the building. Keelan Moses, the ultimate recruiter for LSU. So look, head over, go 24/7, get all the latest scoop and the news and notes. Sunny Ship does a great job with that as well, and come hang out with us all week long as we get ready for a barn burner. It's going to be nuts. And you know what I love, Glenn, about this, and we'll end it here. It's an unreal slate of college football. It's going to be fantastic. The
yeah,
chef's kiss is that LSU gets to be the primetime night game while they're on
yeah.
ESPN and ABC. That 6:30 Central kickoff. We appreciate you so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the channel. Check us out on all podcast forums. We appreciate you. He is Glen West. My name is Bryce Koon, and we will catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.